Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me for day 2 of APIs Revisited. And in today's happy hour, I'm joined by Nick Betts, Principal Consultant at Scott Logic. If you have a question for Nick, pop it into the question box and we'll take as many as we can at the end. And if you haven't already signed up for the other happy hours that will be taking place the same time every day this week, I'll put a link in the chat box where you'll be able to view the whole schedule and book your place for the other sessions. And if you don't already have a copy of our white paper that accompanies the series, you can download it by clicking the same URL in the chat box or by filling in your survey at the end. Now, if any of you were watching yesterday's webinar, you'll know that we're using our surveys to support a very good cause. Throughout Digital Leaders Week, Scott Logic is donating £5 to the Altitude Foundation for every completed survey. The survey takes just 60 seconds to complete, and I'll give you more information about how to access the survey and tell you a bit about the charity after Nick's presentation. And we'll be able to see just how much money we've managed to raise as a result of today's event. So let me now introduce you to today's speaker. Nick Betts is a principal consultant with more than 20 years of experience within the field of technology. He started his career in the late 90s as a software engineer, and since then he's led a variety of high-profile digital transformation projects and programs across the private and public sector, with a specialism in retail banking, open banking, and central government. Outside of work, Nick has recently become, in his words, another mammal on the roads. Is everyone familiar with this acronym? I had to look it up. Middle-aged man in lycra, apparently, as he has taken up road cycling during lockdown and qualified as a personal trainer, which I think I could do with as a result of lockdown, Nick. So without any further delay, I'm going to ask Nick to start sharing your video now so that we can all see you, and I'll pass you over to Nick.
Many thanks, Claire. Thanks for the introduction. And yes, obviously I'm here today really to talk about open APIs, compliance or opportunity is the title of the presentation. And really I'm going to focus on some of the real use cases for open APIs across a number of different sectors today, and look and describe how organizations are really starting to move from what was originally a compliance mindset through to seeing the opportunities that opening up data can really deliver. So before we delve into the detail then, let's just get a clear consensus on what is an open API and what an API is for the uninitiated there. So clearly an API, for those who don't know, is an application programming interface, which at a high level is a set of functions that allow two computers to talk to each other in simple terms. In terms of an open API then, clearly it's publicly available. There's a few nuances between APIs and some of them are private. So an open API is publicly available. It's discoverable, often over the internet. It's built on a set of open standards, and I'll come on to open banking, which was a good example of how these open standards were adopted. It's shared freely and free to use in most cases, fully documented so that developers know how to consume the API through the documentation, and it allows services to be accessed by other developers. So moving on in terms of where open APIs are currently being used across different sectors, we'll start with financial services and specifically open banking, which is an area I'm very familiar with. I worked with a bank recently on an implementation of their own APIs, open banking APIs, over the course of a sort of 15-month project. So I'm very familiar with the nuances of open banking. For anyone who's not aware of it, and to be honest, if you haven't worked in financial services or you haven't worked in technology, there's no reason why you would be familiar with open banking, if I'm honest. And this isn't really intended to be a real detailed overview of open banking. If you are interested in that and would like to know more, I did write a blog post recently on the ScottLogic website, so please, go away and take a look at that on our website. But today is going to be more of a high-level overview in the context of open APIs about open banking. So in terms of a background then, so open banking is effectively the UK version of the Payment Services Directive, or PSD2 as it's known. And it was brought in by the Competition and Markets Authority early 2018 to really bring competition and innovation into that financial services market, which was being, it's quite a closed environment up until that point. Like many things within banking, initially, it was a compliance-driven initiative overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority. Based on a standardized set of performant APIs, the FCA put in place an oversight body known as the Open Banking Implementation Entity. And they really ensured that banks were complying to a fairly rigid set of standards. The open banking APIs allow a number of different transactions from third-party providers to access via customer consent, customer account information, and to make third-party payments on behalf of a customer. In terms of the standards that I mentioned, there's a whole set of open banking standards, from technical API standards known as Swagger specs, through to customer experience guidelines. So this really is all about the customer journey, making sure that banks don't introduce friction into that user experience for anyone using an open banking app and so on. And also to try and make it as familiar as possible, to try and, if I'm a customer and I currently use a website or a mobile to log into my current account or credit card, trying to make that journey as familiar as possible for the customer. And then another set of standards that were brought in for open banking were the operational guidelines. And these were really based on, once the system goes live, how performant, how available it needs to be. And there was some really clear and quite challenging benchmarks really for the banks to hit on that. And it also included a whole set of management information reporting that the banks had to submit on a monthly and a quarterly basis. So there's a whole set of standards there that banks must adhere to. And as you would expect, anything compliance driven, I think it's fair to say a lot of the banks viewed open banking quite negatively at first. Firstly, it's a very high investment IT program to get open banking up and running. Although it's APIs, there's a whole vast array of different changes needed across the bank, depending on the product set, but it touches a whole number of different IT systems. So the bank saw that quite negatively based on their full portfolio of other projects and products that they had to deliver. As I mentioned, it's yet another FCA mandated initiative. So, another stick rather than a carrot. And I think the big worry, if you like, for the banks was they're effectively opening up their crown jewels to third-party providers. So would banks lose control of their key data asset, which is customer data? And in doing so, also create additional competition in the market, which clearly may not be a good thing for the banks. So I think initially there was definitely this nervousness from the banks. It was definitely compliance driven. I think so coming from back in 2018 through to 2020, coming into 2021, there's definitely been a shift, I think, in mindset across the whole ecosystem, if you like. It's been more than a year now since the 2019 September deadline. So this is when banks had to ensure their API solution was up and running and it was compliant with all the standards I mentioned earlier. So that was the key driver, I think, from a compliance point of view. I think since then, financial institutions no longer see the third-party providers and the fintechs as the threat that they did a year ago. The focus is absolutely shifting from a compliance mindset to saying, wow, you know, there's some opportunities here. There's a new ecosystem. Can we actually leverage some of these open banking APIs as part of the strategy for growth within the banks? The third-party provider, the TPP ecosystem, it has really taken off. You know, there's over 300 TPPs out there now, all with different shiny apps that use open banking technology. So there's definitely been a clear transition from 2018 through to where we are now, developing quite a well-oiled third-party application ecosystem, and banks are seeing the competitive advantage they can gain if they embrace this new ecosystem and brave new world. So absolutely still a long way to go. You know, it's still very much in its infancy, open banking. However, there's certainly the possibility of expanding the current fairly limited data set that the banks are opening up with the onset of OpenFinance on the horizon, which I'll come on to in a couple of slides. I think it's worth talking about some of the perceived blockers to open banking investment as well from the banks. So initially, you know, I mentioned high investment IT projects and so on to get this up and running. Some of the other inhibitors or perceived blockers anyway that the banks have highlighted for open banking at the offset, I think legacy IT was a top issue. Overlaying APIs onto creaking outdated infrastructure that's unsupported is never a good idea. And there's actually a really good presentation that my colleague Richard is giving on how organizations can take control of their legacy IT with APIs tomorrow. So definitely tune in for that to get some more information on that. So legacy IT was clearly one of the inhibitors to growth. And then just general, you know, other business priorities, other regulatory initiatives that the banks have to comply with. We're pushing open banking down the priority stack. And in some ways, this delayed, I guess, the onset and banks being ready for that September 2019 deadline. Nonetheless, I think, you know, there's been a few hurdles, a few obstacles in the way, but I think nonetheless, financial institutions are now really optimistic about open banking. Return on investment from a recent survey that was done across the banks, more than 2/3 are now expecting to see the benefits of open banking to outweigh the cost in less than 5 years. So clearly, you know, there's a large upfront investment needed for open banking and open APIs, but the banks are going to recoup that in less than 5 years, which isn't a bad return on investment. So just moving on, staying within the realms of open banking then. So this diagram, you know, very high level overview of the different components at a very, very high level. You know, this is oversimplified, but as I've mentioned, the open APIs are an overlay really for the core banking systems, and that could be legacy mainframes, it could be mobile app technology. So there's a whole host of different products that make up that core banking stack. The third-party developer community clearly are the consumers of that, or they develop the apps for the consumers of that. And then via their own mobile and web applications, they then present the applications in terms of the different benefits that the apps are going to give across extending customer reach, revenue, and stimulating innovation in the market. I think extending customer reach is really a key thing, not only for the third-party providers, but it really opens up new markets for the banks as well. As I mentioned, there's over 300 TPPs out there at the moment and growing each day. And there's a real diverse set of applications. I think initially the use cases and the apps were fairly similar, you know, account aggregation, bringing your accounts together into one place. Third-party payments hasn't taken off as much as the account aggregation, more because some of the functionality such as refunds isn't quite there yet. So I think once we start seeing that full functionality, that sort of use case will take off. increasing revenue is a key driver. It's all about the P&L for the banks. So return on investment, I think, again, banks through the use of this expanded ecosystem can really increase their revenue, new revenue streams, as customers open new products and use their services via these third-party apps. And then all of this clearly is about stimulating innovation, creating competition in the market, and so on. And there's definitely an ecosystem built up now, and I think we're even seeing banks partnering with fintechs, where once they saw them as competition, they're partnering, and in some cases, they're actually acquiring fintechs to take that forward. And according to some research this year from Finastra, 86% of global banks are looking to use APIs to enable open banking capabilities in the next 12 months. So that there's a definite shift to saying, okay, this was compliance. It was a tick box exercise. We had to do it to get the tick box from the FCA. But right, we've invested all that money. There's an ecosystem. There's innovation here. How can we take that on and really build it into our strategy? So definitely a good thing for the banks. As I said, open banking is still in its infancy, but it's absolutely growing. Just some recent figures there that were released by Open Banking just last month. They've just announced over 2 million customers are now using open banking enabled products. And that's despite the disruptive influence of COVID that we've seen. And in some cases, I think COVID has actually driven up the usage of open banking. Clearly, people want to have a good handle, an insight on their finances during this time. So why not download some of the apps, use those apps. As a consumer, you may not even know it's open banking that's driving the technology. The 2 million mark, so that's actually a doubling in users since January, which is quite incredible, really, through 2020. It did plateau, the numbers did plateau slightly in April and May, but then we've seen a ramp up since May. So although there's 2 million users, that's still a very small percentage of the UK population. So there's definitely still some huge growth and opportunities there. And as I mentioned, open banking may well morph into this term open finance, which I'll come on to next. Okay, so what is open finance? So in essence, open finance is going to take, if it takes off, it would take the concept of open banking, whereby customers give consent to their data to third parties, and extend it out to a much wider set of financial products, as it lists on the slide here. So that may include insurance products, investments, pensions, any financial services product that you use within your lifestyle would fit within open finance. In terms of where this is at the moment, the FCA put out a call for Hmrc, which is known as the CFI, whereby they were looking to get feedback and ideas, I guess, based on how open banking has gone from interested bodies. That call for interest ended this month. So at the moment, the FCA have taken away all of that feedback. There's been various discussions on it. And they're going to take stock of the developments in open banking. Clearly, the uptake this year is a good thing. And assess whether the same model from open banking could be used and implemented across the wider financial services landscape and beyond to empower customers to take control of their finances. And like I said, even more so, that this has really become prevalent during COVID. The FCA definitely sees the benefits in the concept of open finance and wants to be at the forefront of the development globally, in the same way that the UK really championed open banking under PSD2. So just to bring this to life, so what is, or what could open finance be? Well, imagine one morning on your way to work, which is probably just walking down the stairs at the moment, you open an app and effectively in that app, you can access all of your bank accounts, your credit cards, your mortgage information, pensions, savings accounts, ISAs, any investment information you have, your car insurance, your home insurance, life insurance, all of that information, even if it's across different providers, into one app. And then imagine that app really can provide innovative financial management services across all of these products. So it scans across all of your data, allows you really to automate some of that switching to the best products. So it could give you holistic investment advice and budgeting based on all of that information. And if there is any excess cash across your account, sweep that into higher yielding products to get better return on your investment. So, could be a really transformative initiative if it does take off for both consumers and open finance organizations alike. So definitely watch this space, I would say. I'm hoping we're going to see an announcement from the FCA imminently. If it's not back end of this year because of COVID, it could be slightly delayed, but definitely start of 2021. I'd like to see this. This is something that really takes off. Moving on then, so that's really been focusing on the open APIs within the world of finance, which is, to be fair, is really driving some of the take-up of open APIs in the UK and globally. But what about some of the other sectors where open APIs are becoming prevalent and could disrupt different sectors? Energy sector. Right, okay, so this is a sector really ripe for disruption. It's fairly archaic in terms of its data access, and it's monopolized in terms of some of the energy providers out there. And if I'm honest, there hasn't been much change over the last few decades in terms of offering consumers a competitive and transparent service offering. As we know, how we generate and use energy is transforming drastically. There's a real focus on becoming carbon neutral and moving to a more distributed and carbon neutral system within that sector. And we're also seeing the move to smart energy and the rollout of smart meters starting to gather pace now, which is an excellent thing. Additionally, in the background, a lot of the big energy providers, the monopoly, if you like, their license to operate is up for renewal in 2023. So clearly, the timing's right. It seems like a bit of a perfect storm within this sector to really give it a shake up and transform it. And Ofgem are also, I think they can see the opportunity to drive change in digitization. In terms of how this might happen, then I think there's a real mirroring of the way open banking regulations came in several years ago. So that there's now growing calls within the energy sector for the opening up of data under what would be known as open energy. And as the statement there from Martin Cave at Ofgem states, open energy could enable competition, drive down prices, with a real sort of goal of helping that decarbonisation of the energy infrastructure. I think that one of the key differentiators and differences between open energy and open banking. Open banking was very much consumer-led at first. Open energy, I think initially, to start with at least, is going to be more about the distribution operators coming at it from that angle, opening up that monopoly. Clearly, that's going to help the consumer further down the line. In terms of the technology and where do open APIs come into this? Well, open data is the key enabler to all of this, as it was for open banking. And that's going to help them achieve net zero. So there are definitely barriers. Whether or not there's more barriers in the energy sector than there was in banking sectors, debatable. But there are definitely barriers in the current energy system that need to be overtaken in terms of the effective use of data. Some of these are things like lack of common data standards, the There's no openly shared data repository. And there's not a culture of data sharing at all within the energy sector. It's more about data hoarding, if I'm being honest. And all of this really is impeding competition. As I mentioned, there's a monopoly. You know, the big energy providers that we all know are really running this at the moment. And to some extent, that stifles innovation and doesn't really give consumers a truly flexible and optimized service. So how might this happen? I think, you know, there's a lot of overlap, and if we look at how things started with open banking, there clearly needs to be new legislation, which is the driver for this, to open up data in the UK energy sector. So firstly, we need policy reforms to change the terms of the energy market in favour of customers and innovators, fintechs, effectively. The energy data, so as I mentioned, you know, there's all this smart meter data that's being collected. Any energy data needs to be standardized and made available through machine readable open APIs. And then we really need to give energy customers power over their meter and contract data. I think smart meters and open data could really form the backbone of this new open energy ecosystem. The target the government set was to have all homes and small businesses with smart meters by the end of this year. I think there's some way off that. However, you know, I think the latest stats I saw was about 20 million homes and small businesses now have smart meters. So, you know, there's definitely, again, a bit of an ecosystem growing there, which is good to see. So where do open APIs come in? Well, I think open APIs are going to allow third parties to access and leverage these energy data streams, ultimately driving more switching and bringing new innovative energy services into the market. As I mentioned, without legislation, this just won't take off, you know, so there needs to be a change in the legislation. And this would ensure that energy companies are mandated to open up their data via a standard set of APIs, much like open banking. You know, there's so much crossover with open banking. So, you know, taking that data encapsulation solution through APIs, through the secure presentation layer, from a cloud through to the energy ecosystem. Some of the key use cases, I think standardizing tariffs in some form of machine readable format is going to really accelerate the way that technology can help here. Making smart meter data available through a secure standardized API, again, for approved third parties. It's all about building up that third party provider ecosystem. And I think, you know, once we have standardized data and so on, the automated tariff switching becomes more of a reality, giving customers the best deals available through automation. And things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, which are definitely coming at the fore in the world of open banking, would also help in the energy sector as well. So yeah, quite an exciting sector, in my opinion, for open APIs in terms of opportunities. You know, I think that there's a lot of change, there's a lot of benefit and value that could be added to this sector by opening up the data available. So clearly a sector ripe for disruption, and you know, open APIs could really enable this and unblock some of those obstacles that are in the way at the moment. And within ScotLogic, we're already having conversations with a number of energy companies on this exact subject now, about how we could potentially help and how technology can really make this reality. So yeah, exciting. I think energy sector is definitely one on the horizon over the next 5 years. And we'll see some real growth in this sector with technology. Moving on then, so other sectors where open APIs are helping to accelerate the transformation. DWP is a key client for ScotLogic. on a personal level, I've worked with the department, crikey, since 1999 on various different initiatives. And I know from speaking to some of the leadership at DWP, you know, and as you see in the media, COVID's really driving huge spikes in benefit claims, such as universal credit. Even just since March, there's been over 3.5 million universal credit claims, which is way in excess of anything that was planned, clearly. And that spike it puts pressure across the organization, but definitely on the operational processing, you know, the front end, but also on the technology. So none of the technology was really built for these sort of volumes. APIs, in particular, open APIs, are really driving some of the rapid changes DWP need to make and are making to support the processing and payment of some of these COVID-related claims. As you would imagine, everyone's had to pivot quickly, especially within government and DWP, to push out new services, to provide insight to different cross-government departments on COVID and so on. And often there's no time to build new services. Things have to be done, you know, not within weeks. Sorry, not within months, but often in days, within weeks. And that's where APIs have really helped, as the quote shows on the slide. You know, it's really helped DWP to accelerate that transformation. DWP already had a really good library of APIs, reusable APIs in the cloud, and they've had that for, you know, almost 2 years, around about 18 months. And that's a really useful test bed within DWP for testing services, you know, test and fail, refine, without having to reinvent the wheel each time and go through the usual development life cycle of test, build and test and so on. DWP have seen some real accelerated development here using open APIs, where they can build a service once, make it reusable. And also it helps on quality, you know, because it's tested once, it works, it's reused by different services. So it's definitely more, it's quicker, it's more accurate delivery. In terms of a few examples of where DWP have used these open APIs in anger recently during COVID, where they've really had to integrate with other external bodies, cross-government services using open APIs. So as we know, you know, there's been a real uplift in the number of HGV driver applications to, you know, support supermarkets and NHS deliveries during the pandemic. And DWP had a real part to play in that, because all of these drivers had to go through citizen validation checks with the DVLA before they could actually take on that service. And DWP were responsible for providing those open APIs between DWP and the DVLA to undertake those validation checks for the drivers. So again, you know, really good reuse of already existing open APIs during the pandemic. Other examples, the NHS prescription exemption check, which again, numbers doubled overnight during the pandemic. DWP are responsible for providing a stable service there. And free school meals qualification checks, another open API that DWP have developed. Again, the numbers have more than doubled on this, and that uses a DWP income checking open API service. So just a few examples really of where, you know, having reusable components on the shelf, tried, tested, really comes to the fore, where, you know, government departments and any other organization need to pivot, they need to react quickly, and that's where open APIs can really benefit. And it's not just DWP, I guess, within government that are using open APIs. I think if you look at any other government body, they've all got their own developer portals and open API libraries. HMRC is another really good example. As we know, HMRC developed some time ago their real-time interface for pushing tax returns from accountants through to HMRC. And even now, you know, they're helping with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, where they've had to develop that service really quickly using reusable components. And the Making Tax digital service, whereby, you know, all tax submissions from VAT to self-assessment are all now online. They're all using microservices and APIs to submit those services. So, you know, there's some really good unseen work, I think, within government, especially within the API level. And then government digital services shouldn't be overlooked. So clearly they span across all government bodies at a cross-government level. In October last year, they released their own API library, if you like, which is out there. If you Google it, it's out there on the web. And that's across all central government and local government bodies, with really the aim, again, of having reusable components. No need to reinvent the wheel each time, you know, a government service, a local government body needs a specific technology feature. It's there, it's in a library, it can be reused. So some really excellent work in UK government. Just moving on then, so clearly I couldn't have a presentation at the moment without talking about the UK health sector and the NHS. And I think, you know, one of the long-standing problems that we have in healthcare is the way that data is siloed. It's held by local organizations. And there's been a real need for some time to be able to connect all of that up. Traditional mechanisms of integrating systems tended to be point-to-point, meaning that if you wanted to change any of those point-to-point systems, you had to change it at both ends. So a bit of an overhead in terms of cost and complexity of maintaining all of these different integration points. With open APIs within the health sector, it really becomes less about defining what needs to be sent from point A to point B, and more about point A saying, you know, here's the data that I've got, and here are the conditions under which you can access it. If point B passes me the information, gets through all the right checks and balances, you can use that data to develop new products and services. So open APIs are absolutely being welcomed as a bit of a possible savior of the health IT in the UK, a way to open up new markets and innovation, and to free patient data from the current siloed approach in pursuit of more integrated care. And as the quote on the slide states, you know, the NHS UK's ambition really is to take any business functionality that they've got currently, where it's exposed by systems, and push that through open APIs. So where do open APIs fit within the health ecosystem, the overall healthcare? A number of places really, but I think, you know, there's three that I'll call out. Interoperability is a key thing. So making sure that applications, that the functionality in applications is easily available. So this helps organizations ensure their systems are interoperable and can speak to each other, you know, in the right language effectively. Secondly, integration. So having key functionality openly available through an API ensures organizations can integrate systems, deliver the best systems to suit the needs of the different clinical and business functions. And then finally, innovation. You know, all of this, any sector that I, you know, talk to the leadership of it, it's all about innovation as well. So opening up data within different systems helps to promote and support that culture of innovation. With the appropriate controls in place, it makes it easier for technical or clinical staff to use the information to improve patient outcomes or safety. And it really allows all of this to be done much more quickly and at a lower cost. So in terms of the open APIs. So I think before developing any type of API, be it open or private, it's really important that teams engage user groups rather than just assume they know what the API should do, build it, deliver it, and then move on to something else. Research it, user research. Although a lot of this isn't front-end UI type user experience, I think user research is definitely part of this. So do the research, understand API users' needs, and that can really improve the design significantly and reduce the time and cost of any integration. A really good example of this, the NHS Digital recently conducted a survey of healthcare software developers. And they did a bit of a survey to try and find out how easy integration was with NHS Digital APIs. And the average rating they found when they did this survey with the third-party developers was actually ease of integration was a 2 out of 5. So not brilliant. And without doing this sort of survey or research, user research, NHS would never have known this. And some of the common pain points that come out of this, I think, and some of the feedback from the developers was that the APIs were hard to find, they were poorly written, in some cases incomplete, or some of the API documentation was inconsistent. APIs were technically complex and often hard to integrate with. So, I think simplicity is definitely key here. Some of the developers found that the APIs were hard to access, or there was no useful sort of test bed to test it, which is often the case with these APIs. There was often a bit of a convoluted assurance process to onboard the APIs, which put people off. And then just generally, hard to locate help and support. So I think even when there's documentation, there needs to be some form of dialogue available for third-party providers to speak to the publishers of the APIs to get some help and support. So I think taking that feedback, NHS Digital then built on that, and they've developed their own really useful API developer portal to allow other developers to integrate with their systems and syndicate content, etc. And some of the latest COVID-19 related content is on there within the APIs. So, really critical data that they're opening up within that sector. Just pausing there. So, what do I think personally that the future holds for open APIs in the health sector? So personally, I really do, and I think already on this journey, but I think the healthcare technology market will change, and we're going to see non-traditional providers getting more uptake. I think you will see technology-enabled care being delivered in different ways, services being delivered in different ways. And there's going to be a change in direction as to how healthcare can deliver closer to the patient, I think, and at the patient's convenience, rather than the current situation where it's all about, where's the clinician located typically. And we're already seeing new ways of GP services being accessed in this way. For a patient, I think the conveniences of being able to access the information and care when I want to, being able to contribute towards my patient record and access my patient record, which is, it's my data, it's your data. And, I just find it's quite strange in this day and age that we don't, as patients, have access to our own medical record online, and, we're not able to review that and keep it up to date effectively via self-service. So I definitely see open data leading to us being able to do that in the future. And I see this being a huge benefit to the way citizens access health services in the UK going forward. So just to summarize, and a bit of a whistle-stop tour, so I hope everyone's still with me on this. So just to summarize about what I've talked about today. So it's clear to me that open banking has absolutely led the way in the banking world on how open APIs can be used to drive innovation and develop new markets. I think it's taking what we've learned with open banking over the last few years, and I hope we really see OpenFinance come to fruition next year. I honestly think that could be the game changer that we need in providing that fully joined up view of our financial health. And as I've mentioned, open APIs are now prevalent across all industry sectors, more than others. But the pandemic this year, as we know, has really put focus on acceleration of technology, and open APIs are definitely part of that growth. Having access to reusable technology to allow organizations to react quickly, as I've mentioned within DWP and the NHS and Hmrc and so on, without reinventing the wheel, is definitely been beneficial. I think government and health are real shining examples of how this has benefited society, really. And no pun intended, but I think the future is bright for the energy sector. As I mentioned, I think we're on the cusp of something fairly transformative within that sector. And I think open APIs and open data are going to be the key driver and enabler for that over the next 5 years. And I think finally, to bring us back to the subject of this presentation, so open APIs, is it compliance or is it opportunity? Personally, I think, depending on the sector, but initial usage is often a bit of a stick. So, it's driven by legislation and compliance. But I think once organizations get over that hurdle and once the ecosystem does develop, it leads to a wealth of opportunities for both organizations and consumers alike. So I think, it moves from the initial stick through to the carrot. So on that note, thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you found it interesting. I'd like to thank digital leaders. There's some brilliant talks this week that I'm dropping into, so definitely get signed up for them. And yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. Back to you, Claire.